croissant? The croissant looks ancient, but the modern version is surprisingly recent. Britannica notes that the first recipe for the croissant, as it is known today, appeared only in 1906. Its identity depends on laminated yeast dough, where butter is folded into the dough again and again, creating the pastry's honeycomb interior and brittle shell. In France, that butter still matters enough that bakeries distinguish between an ordinary croissant and the richer croissant au beurre. What seems like a simple breakfast bread is really a lesson in controlled temperature. If the butter stays cold, steam lifts the layers. If it melts too early, the flake disappears. Pastel de nata, Portugal's most famous tart, began in a monastery rather than a bakery. The pastry's roots reach back to the Geronimos monastery in Belém before the 18th century, where monks are said to have used leftover egg yolks after egg whites were consumed in other convent work, including starching clothes. After the liberal revolution of 1820 weakened religious institutions, the monks began selling the custard tarts for income. The monastery closed in 1834, and by 1837, the recipe had passed to the nearby business that became the Fábrica de Pastel de Belém. The result is a paradox: crisp pastry, trembling custard, and a scorched top that tastes both burnt and sweet. Apfelstrudel. Apfelstrudel is one of Europe's clearest examples of technique becoming theater. Austria's official tourism site dates the oldest known Apfelstrudel recipe to 1696 and notes that Empress Maria Theresa helped make it fashionable in the 18th century. Its signature is not the filling alone, but the dough, stretched so thin it can become nearly transparent before being wrapped around apples, raisins, cinnamon, and sugar. When baked properly, the outer layers shatter while the inside steams gently, turning the pastry into a contrast of crispness and softness. It is less a cake than a rolled architecture of tension, fruit, and heat. Cannoli. Cannoli are often treated as cheerful pastry shop sweets, but their history is older and more layered than the striped shell suggests. National Geographic notes that cannoli are thought to date back to the Middle Ages, with some accounts placing their emergence in Sicily under Arab rule. One legend even traces them to 9th century Caltanissetta, whose Arabic-derived name once meant Castle of Women. Over time, the shell became the defining gesture, fried until blistered and crisp, then filled only at the last moment so it does not soften. In Sicily, the filling is strongly associated with ricotta, often from sheep's milk, giving cannoli a richer, slightly wilder dairy flavor than cream-filled pastries elsewhere. Sfogliatella. Sfogliatella is one of Naples' most dramatic pastries because its texture begins long before the first bite. According to Visit Naples, its story starts in a convent in Amalfi where a nun used leftover semolina cooked in milk and mixed it with sugar, dried fruit, and lemon liqueur. More than a century later, at the beginning of the 19th century, Pasquale Pintauro brought the idea to Naples and reshaped it into the form now most associated with the city. The famous Riccia version is built from many thin layers that crisp into a shell, almost like leaves. Inside, the filling is dense, fragrant, and moist, making each bite sound brittle and feel soft. Danish pastry. The Danish pastry is one of Europe's most revealing culinary misdirections because in Denmark it is not called Danish at all. Visit Denmark explains that these pastries are known as wienerbrød, meaning Viennese bread, and were first made in Denmark in the 1840s by Austrian bakers. That foreign origin is still visible in the structure: folds, gloss, coils, and custard-filled centers that belong to a laminated pastry tradition shaped by migration. What Denmark did was not invent the form, but adopt and multiply it into countless local versions sold in everyday bakeries. The pleasure lies in that balance between softness and flake, where sugar caramelizes at the edges and the middle stays tender. Kouign-amann. In Brittany, abundance-shaped pastry just as much as skill. Brittany tourism traces Kouign-amann to Douarnenez around 1860 or around 1865 in another regional account where baker Yves René is credited with turning bread dough, butter, and sugar into something far more intense. The dough is folded repeatedly, much like puff pastry, but the character comes from Breton salted butter and the way sugar and fat melt together in the oven. That creates the pastry's defining contradiction: caramelized glaze outside, almost melting softness within. It is not subtle, and it was never meant to be. Kouign-amann tastes like a region with dairy wealth, sea air, and very little fear of richness. Ensaimada. Mallorca's Ensaimada looks light, almost weightless, but its history is dense with ritual and language. Spain's tourism board notes that documents mention ensaimadas being made for celebrations and festivals as far back as the 17th century. The pastry is built from flour, water, eggs, sugar, sourdough, and lard, the last of which gives the pastry its name through the Mallorcan word saim. Often formed into large spirals, ensaimadas can be served plain or filled, including with angel's hair preserve. Their texture is the surprise, airy and fibrous rather than crisp, with strands that pull apart more like sweet bread than brittle pastry. It is a festive food that feels gentle until its richness catches up. Trdelník. Chimney cake may look ancient and local in Central Europe, but even Czech tourism materials treat its identity with caution. Visit Czechia notes that Trdelník is sold widely at stalls and market windows across Czechia, yet its roots probably lie in Transylvania, in present-day Romania, before spreading through Hungary and Slovakia, and later into the Czech lands. The pastry is made by winding dough around a roller, rotating it over heat, and brushing it until the surface turns golden. The result is a hollow cylinder with a toasted crust and a soft interior, often finished with cinnamon sugar or modern fillings like ice cream and chocolate. It is both heritage and performance, baked in public and designed to be watched. Churros. Churros are among Europe's simplest pastries, but their popularity rests on precision rather than complexity. Spain's official tourism site describes them as a breakfast or snack food, usually eaten with thick hot chocolate or dusted with sugar, and often bought freshly made from street stands. Britannica adds that they are common morning food from vendors and coffee bars, eaten on the move. The dough is piped directly into hot oil, which explains the ridged surface. Those grooves increase crispness and hold sugar more effectively. Good churros are never delicate. They should crack at the edges, stay slightly hollow inside, and deliver immediate warmth, sweetness, and fried flavor before the texture turns soft.